Scythe Tleppo, Chapter 5. The return home was a strange and dark experience. My mother had moved to Glendale because she wanted some distance from Hollywood. She said there were a lot of degraded beings in the area and that Glendale was safer for us. I didn't want to leave the Shangri-Lodge in Hollywood, but I accepted Glendale as my new home. Anywhere was better than the ranch. Our new home was a back house with a fig tree in the yard and an older Scientologist couple living in the front. It was the only time we ever lived in anything more than an apartment, if that counts as such. My grandfather was dead, somehow. How did it happen? My mother told me there would be a Jewish funeral and that Martin would be buried. I thought this was unusual because if it were left up to the family, they would have cremated him after some gentle words about finding Scientology in the next lifetime. The day of his funeral, my mother dressed me in a suit and a yarmulke, and we met the whole family at a cemetery. That's where I saw my grandmother Frances for the first time after Marty passed. She was a hysterical mess, barely able to walk. "I killed him," she wailed. "I killed him. I killed him." For the first time in my life, I recognized real pain when I saw it. I had never seen her so destroyed. Her world had collapsed. She had 39 years of a grand marriage to Marty, but those days were over, and she thought she killed him. What does she mean? I had no way to get answers. Everyone was crying and upset. The funeral was grim and depressing. There were around 20 people in attendance, mostly older friends of the family. They huddled around the grave, depressed, shocked, and confused. No one knew how to act or what to do. My family was powerless and decentralized. The structure was destroyed. Everyone sobbed, overcome with the harsh reality setting in. There was no direction, no peace. What will happen to us? Are we going to be okay? After the Hebrew verses, we lined up to throw piles of dirt onto Marty's coffin. My turn came, and I stepped up. I peered down into the grave at his coffin, but felt only a blank sadness. I inventoried my emotions in an effort to understand why I wasn't crying, but was unsuccessful. I didn't know him well, but I loved and respected him. He was more than family to me. He was my idol. I threw in some dirt and quietly walked to a nearby tree where my mother was crying. I ended that dark day ashamed and guilty about not crying for him. After the funeral came the estate sale, which struck me as identical to a yard sale. People came and asked about lamps. They wondered about roll-top desks. They feigned solace as they searched for good deals. "How much for these?" "Cross pens, $3. "Are these coins silver?" Frances was there to consult about value, but instead she tried to keep everything. She clung to the small things that reminded her of Marty, while the sisters tried to sell everything off. It was a disintegration of an entire lifetime. My family offered Marty's belongings up like sorrow-marinated meat to hungry vultures. I was disgusted by the entire process. These people were transparently exploitive of my grandfather's death. I hated them. I hated their greed. You guys know what that's about. The knife. I enrolled in the public Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, which was hard for me to acclimate to. Even compared to Scientology-based private schools, the safety levels were bad, and there were many mean kids. One Friday, I accidentally left my bike at school. It was a blue Huffy, which I waited forever to get as a gift from my mother. When I returned on Monday, it was totally stripped down. I lied to my mother and told her it was stolen outright. I was too embarrassed to tell her the truth. On my 9th birthday, I got a Nintendo Entertainment Center, an entertainment system, which I'd wanted for years. Despite being the last of my friends to get one, I was thrilled to get it. Video games were like movies with indefinite plots and lengths. I found a black docility in playing them. They numbed my pain and gave me something to do. It's disassociation. My grades in school were still poor, though I scored in the 97th percentile of the CTBS standardized test. I just couldn't get along with the teachers. He was probably smarter than them. I didn't respect them. By May, I was expelled for talking back again. I missed the rest of the 3rd grade, which meant there would be no chance for new friends or stability in my life. There wasn't a lot of talk about Marty, as my mother tried to build me the life I had before. Scientology schools, auditing, and courses. I tried harder to be my mom's little man. I was the only man left in the family. I struggled to step up my responsibilities and committed considerable effort to holding my emotions inside. I had to hide my pain both from the ranch and from Marty's death. I tried to be strong, but that strength didn't last long. I didn't know how my mother felt about what happened to me at the ranch. Does she care? One day my mother was on an errand and I was home alone. I went into the kitchen, got a knife, pulled it out and held it up. It had a dark brown wooden handle with metal rivets and a serrated blade. I held the knife's tip to my heart and fantasized about plunging it in my chest to end my experience. I knew there was another lifetime after mine, and the life I was in had already gone so wrong. I felt the sharpness of the blade on my chest. I thought about the pain and blood that would come if I killed myself. I twisted the knife just a bit to feel my skin move underneath its direction. I pictured my mother coming home to find me dead on the kitchen floor with a knife sticking out of my chest. She would be so devastated. I loved her too much to do it. I need to be strong for her. I need to survive. This is parentification. I paused my thoughts, placed the knife back into the drawer, and mustered the strength to carry on. Amish. In an effort to distance herself from me and improve my behavior at school, my mom sent me to live with Sharon and Jake in New York again. She wanted me to participate in Scientology more than anything else. This time, though, the New York wing of my family took me on a road trip. We drove to Los Angeles, Florida, and back to New York, and saw nearly every national monument, museum, and tourist attraction on the way. It was an enriching experience, though I wish my mother wanted to be there with me, and missed her a lot. I enjoyed the time we sifted for gold, when we stayed with an Amish family, and when we saw the bed Abraham Lincoln died on. It was odd living with the Amish for the short time we did, because our attitude towards them was of amusement and humor. We didn't make fun of them, but we thought they were kooky. I knew even then that we had things in common with the Amish, but we weren't honest like they were. Amish people don't hide who they are, so why do we? Travel became part of my blood, but my mother never participated in it with me. Huh. By the time I returned home, I had missed the 5th grade already. I was ready to try Scientology again for my mom, the flight. I just needed some stability first, but without me knowing the adults planned a big move. Enough is enough, my mother said after a week after I returned to Glendale. This is all about control. It's sickening. We're moving to Clearwater. We're going to Source. In Clearwater, Florida, the Flag Building and its sibling buildings, from what Scientologists think of as the source of Scientology, the headquarters. Francis is there already. We're going to, my mother explained. As a co-owner of Fountain Press, the print shop in Hollywood, my mother needed to sort out business stuff before she could move. In the meantime, she told me, "You're going ahead of me and will live with your grandma. You're going to help her get some sanity, okay?" I thought about living with Frances alone in Florida. Frances had previously attained Scientology's highest level, OT8. She felt responsible for Marty's death and struggled with that loss, the most terrible of her life. Yet he was never a Scientologist. I was nervous about going, but my mom assured me it would be fine. Though I was only 10, I flew alone to Florida. Where my Aunt Arlene, on approved break from the Sea Organization, received me. What was that one day? She brought me to the condo where Frances was living. On the way, she prepared me for the experience. Don't say anything in theta. Nay. Keep everything theta and uptone. A great childhood. Theta in Scientology's word for positive energy, while in theta is negative energy. Uptone means high positive emotions. She wanted me to stay positive all the time. We arrived at Frances's place. Arlene went back to Flag and my new life began. The jungle. Florida was hot, muggy, and rainy. I found the weather exciting with its overwhelming booms of thunder and flashes of lightning. Californians experience small earthquakes, but Floridians live through dramatic hurricanes. The subtropical landscape was lush with green moss and thriving plants. Lizards, insects, peacocks, and even alligators seem to roam free in Florida. Cicadas turn the nights into insect concerts. Exchanging urban Los Angeles with lush Florida felt like transitioning to a jungle world. Frances lived alone in a condominium near Clearwater, since she was too emotionally distraught to receive Scientology services. Read between the lines there. She had little to fill her time. She didn't work or study and had no friends in Florida. She lost any interest in hobbies and had nothing to distract her, so she spent most of her time crying for her loss. She was convinced she killed her husband. She internalized the pain, which was clear to me by her every action. Her mind was simple, a sort of desperate elegance blended with transparent despair. Nothing went past her without being warped into negativity. She was reactive, a victim. I had never seen someone so despondent in my life, but I completely understood how she felt. I thought, I knew by then what it was like to feel pain. I knew what it was like to have no help. Grief rendered her helpless, and she was trapped in that helplessness. In her mind, nothing could make a difference. She didn't want hugs or love. She didn't need food or rest. She wanted her husband back, and nothing else would do. Me, in my opinion, that's selfish. I mean, taken to an extreme, that's what I mean. Because this child needed love. Because Scientologists are anti-psychology and anti-psychiatry, no form of counseling was ever considered for Frances. I got back on Scientology courses and auditing and tried to endure. Occasionally, my mother called to give me words of encouragement about taking care of my grandma. Isn't that great? Keep everything theta. Good roads and fair weather with her. Nathan, she instructed. Scientologists, when interacting with critics, or in this case, sensitive people, use specific techniques like good roads, fair weather, mentioning positive things without specifics, never discussing anything personal or negative. Sounds like gray rocking. I knew what it meant. No negativity, no backflash, no bad behavior, no anything. Keep everything light and calm. I did my very best to adhere to these instructions. All Frances had was me. You guys see what I mean? That's why I'm laughing. This child needs love. And I was responsible to do my part in fixing her, using Scientology's technology. Stay just one emotional tone level above her, and that will raise her emotional tone. Scientologists say, stay just slightly more positive than someone, and they will become more positive as well. I did my best, but it didn't work. Irregular. As I settled into this new paradigm, the practical situation became clear. Music was a grief trigger for Frances, so out of respect for her emotions, I didn't listen to music. Sorry, I gotta get some water. She did watch movies with me, though. Old classics, somehow free of triggering memories, like The Sound of Music, Fiddler on the Roof, and Madame Butterfly. My mother didn't allow me to bring my Nintendo, probably suspecting I'd be glued to it, rather than supporting my grandmother. When I wasn't watching movies, I escaped into puzzles or Scientology books. Frances joined in on the puzzles sometimes, but wasn't interested in fun or playing games. I felt like an inconvenience to her. I was annoyed at my mother for putting me in this position. I felt frustrated, ill-equipped to handle Frances. I wanted her to heal, but didn't know how to help her. I felt like I was a reminder to her that Marty wasn't there anymore. Frances was extremely frugal. When I needed new socks, she bought only irregulars, the ones that didn't pass quality checks. All my clothes came from thrift stores, mostly generic brands. She bought the cheapest food and snacks she could find, but nothing with sugar ever. Scientology heavily discourages sugar consumption, and she did too. Bland, flavorless, chalky cookies were my occasional treat. I never complained about these things, though. I was overwhelmed by the situation, but I knew my problems paled in comparison to hers, and she was very unstable. The slightest disagreement with Frances invariably triggered a psychological reaction in her. She loudly whistled a tune and walked out of the room. She was deeply troubled, a truly emotionally disturbed woman in need of serious help. I gave her kisses and hugs. I gave her my best behavior, but real help? I didn't know how to give her that. I didn't understand how she had gotten into her situation in the first place. She was the highest level of Scientologist possible. She was supposed to be in total control of herself and her life. How did Marty die? Why does she think she is responsible? The reveal. Arlene was in the Sea Organization, so her time was limited. Her daughter, Eliza, was in the Cadet Org, the child version of the Sea Org. They both needed written permission from corporate Scientology written permission from corporate Scientology, like prestigious executives, to visit us. Those two weren't much help, though. Their goal was to calm Frances down long enough to get her back into Scientology, that is. They brought her their theta and their pleasant news, but the only concern was getting Frances back on the bridge. Scientology's bridge to total freedom. In other words, get her back into session. That was the only thing that could help her in their minds. Arlene had always looked down on the others in the family. You guys know what that is, right? After all, we were just public. She was a truly dedicated Scientologist, the Sea Org member. After a few visits, I finally extracted the story behind my grandfather's death from my aunt. All the years of pressure Frances had been putting on Marty to join Scientology finally took their toll. Frances was already OT8 as of the year before his death. After that, she started the secretive L rundowns, a process which costs tens of thousands of dollars. Even at the top of Scientology levels, there are always more. It costs to be a Scientologist. The L rundowns she was doing involved auditors yelling in her face things like sorcerer, the evil one, and pervert. These kinds of upper Scientology techniques, imagine they have to pay a lot of money for that idiocracy, are so advanced that only the wealthiest and most dedicated people can do them. Yeah, so they can be yelled at and called sorcerer and pervert. You know, the perverts that they hide in there. When Frances first became a low-level Scientologist, she found she was no longer allowed to associate with people antagonistic towards Scientology. As she progressed further, it became people who were merely critical of Scientology. Eventually, she couldn't be intimate with a non-Scientologist, even if he was fine with her being one. It's the same for Scientologists around the world. They willingly disconnect. From non-Scientologists as they get to high levels of the bridge. Of course, by then, there are very few left in their lives to disconnect from. Any non-Scientologists they don't disconnect from are treated increasingly as WOGs, the WOGs, dullards who can't understand reality. It's a racial slur. Conversations with WOGs are exercises in public relations, not communication. Frances didn't want to disconnect from Marty. She loved him. For years, she put pressure on him to join Scientology. At the request of the organization and in accordance to her beliefs, she couldn't participate in a $1,000 an hour yelling session if there were non-Scientologists in her life. Her spiritual freedom was at stake here, and his was too. Marty had to get with the program for the sake of their souls, but he didn't get with the program. While I was at the ranch, he separated from her when the pressure became too much and moved to his favorite city, Paris, where after 39 years of marriage, he died in bed with another woman. At least he died happy. Frances blamed herself for his death. The sisters blamed him, but I blamed Scientology, not aloud, of course. I was 9 years old. Wow, he's only 9 here. So that means when he was getting beaten up at the ranch, he must have been about 6 or 7. Wasn't Wally a great pedophile child abuser? Suicide was already in my thoughts, but I was unsure how I would do it. The methods I saw on TV seemed too painful, and I wouldn't try using a steak knife again. I couldn't bear Frances discovering me. I needed to do it outside the home, where someone else would deal with it. By the way, this is going on right now. And all the PDs, the LA, the Clearwater, they're all totally fine with children wanting to end their lives. They don't have a problem with it. In fact, maybe they think it's a sacrifice to their God. You just never know, do you? That night, I told my grandmother I was going out for a walk and headed outside. I wandered around the neighborhood, a senior citizens residential area, with meticulously groomed grass fields. My thoughts ran so deep. Meticulously groomed grass fields. My thoughts ran deep. I was nearly oblivious to the loud cicadas, mating calls coming from the trees. I approached the nearest road outside the residential area and calmly laid down in the middle of it. Cicadas. I looked up at the stars. The cicadas' chatter was clearly audible for a moment, as reality set in. I'm killing myself. My mind wandered further. I stared up at the night sky. Am I really going to Mars for another implant, as Scientology taught me? How could I get out of there without the brainwashing? One of the wonderful truths Scientology reveals is that on Mars there is an implant station. I believe that's true, to be honest. Where Thetans go after they drop their bodies to get brainwashed into returning to Earth. I had always wanted to find out what Mars was like someday. The sounds of the insects were gone. Will I be there soon? Depressed, the thought of finally seeing space gave me a rush of excitement. Some time passed and no cars came. No people came. And no planes flew by. There were no humans anywhere, only cicadas. Nothing happened. It was as if the world stopped for me. Maybe he had some angels. After around 15 idle minutes, I got up and silently went back home to Frances. I never mentioned anything to her, as she would have gotten mad at me. I thought I really didn't know. Maybe she would have cried. I was home, but the depression was still with me. And my head was a mess. Mute. I was emotionally muted in a position of great pressure. I had to support my grandmother in her most difficult hour. While my thoughts and experience at the ranch were inexpressible, I packed them down inward like the formation of a black hole, just density and pressure packed into the darkness. As time went on, I tried to find ways other than suicide to release my pain. I slowly began torturing small animals, mostly lizards and frogs. Oh boy. Trigger warning. If you like animals, just turn this off right now. Trigger warning. I slowly began torturing small animals, mostly lizards and frogs. I started out by catching frogs, releasing them on a street. I don't want to read the rest of this. You guys can read the book. It wasn't good for the frogs. Later, I moved to burning lizards alive. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read little parts. I suspected they didn't have thetans, so there was no wrong in harming them. Even with the small animal abuse and the long periods of time alone in my room, I could feel the darkness still growing inside me. Prometheus wanted more pain, torture, hate. I think this is I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but it just reminds me of a lot of stories that I've heard of people that are really disassociating. They can't feel anymore. I thought I was escaping him by abusing animals, but I was merely giving him what he wanted. He was evil, an insatiable force.